What's going on, guys? Welcome to another crash course. In this course, we're going to be diving into Vagrant, which is basically a portable environment container to develop and run your applications. And it could be any type of application or stack. You could have Apache installed or Nginx with PHP and MySQL, or Node.js environment, Python, programs like Git and Vim. And these environments are basically tiny virtual machines or VMs called Vagrant boxes. And ultimately, at the end of the tutorial, we'll have an Ubuntu LAMP stack box that you can simply package up and bring to any computer that's using any operating system. It doesn't matter what's on that computer because everything runs within the Vagrant box. All right, many of you have probably also heard of Docker, which is very similar, and I will be releasing a course on Docker as well. So what I'm going to do is take you through what goes into a Vagrant file, which is basically the core of your Vagrant box, all the settings and stuff like that. They can get very complicated, but we're going to be dealing with the basics and fundamentals. And I promise if you follow along and pay attention, you will understand at least the core basics of Vagrant and how to get set up. All right, so the idea is to run a command called Vagrant up, which will whip up our LAMP stack server in basically under a minute or so. Now, you may have used programs like XAMPP or XAMPP or WAMP, any of the amps in the past to, for instance, do PHP applications. And that's fine. Those are great local environments. I've used them many times on the channel, but they're heavy and they're not portable. Okay, what's great about Vagrant and technologies like Docker is you have these isolated environments that you can easily share with your team members, with other people, with clients. You can just give it to someone, they can run a simple command, and that environment is now on their machine and ready to go. There's other advantages as well, especially when it comes to deployment, but we're going to really stick to development in this video. I may do another one on deploying Vagrant apps. Now, if you find that something like Vagrant or Docker isn't for you, maybe you're not at that level yet, there's no harm in sticking with XAMPP or something like that. My goal for this video is just to introduce you to Vagrant, and you can decide if it's something that you want to continue to explore. All right, so the first thing you want to do when getting started is you want to download two things. You want to download Vagrant itself, and you also want to download VirtualBox. So you can get Vagrant from vagrantup.com. Very simple download. Just go ahead and click download, install it. On Windows, it's easy, Mac, Linux. And then you also want to install VirtualBox, which you can get at virtualbox.org. Now, the reason we need VirtualBox is that Vagrant needs a provider. Okay, so basically it needs a virtual VM provider, and VirtualBox is the default. It's I would say the most popular, but there are others you can use as well. So just get those two things installed. I'm not going to do it because it's basically just me clicking next. You guys don't want to see that. But once you get it installed, you can open up your terminal. And if you type in Vagrant-V, you should see the current version of Vagrant, so you know that it's installed. And when you install VirtualBox, you'll have, it'll go in your applications folder or on your desktop, whatever. It'll be on your machine. If you open that up, you should see something like this. Now, when we use Vagrant, very, very rarely are you going to do anything inside of the actual VirtualBox application. When you start up or when you initialize a Vagrant box and you start it up, you'll see it here in VirtualBox, but you want to manage it from within your shell, from within your command line with Vagrant, as opposed to going in here and doing anything. All right, so I will have this open so we can see like the status of our Vagrant box and stuff like that. But for the most part, you're going to be working with Vagrant with the terminal. Now, before we do anything, I'm going to create a directory to work in. So I'm going to say mkdir, and I'm just going to call this vgdemo. And we're going to cd into vgdemo, and I'm going to open up my text editor here. So I'm using Visual Studio Code, so I'm just going to say code dot, and that'll open it in that folder. Okay, let me just align this up here. And basically, this folder is where our Vagrant file is going to go. It's where our project files will go, stuff like that. So let's go back to, let's see. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create an empty file here. You guys don't have to do this. I'm just doing this so that I can kind of explain a couple things. So like I said, the Vagrant file is like the core of Vagrant. That's where all your settings go. That's where all your, where you specify your IP address, your main box, your providers, all that stuff. And there's basically 5 main parts to it. So what I want to do is just explain those 5 main parts. So the first one we have is config.vm.box. And by the way, the Vagrant file is written in Ruby, but you don't have to have any experience with the Ruby language. It's just configuration stuff. So the config VM box is basically your operating system. Okay, so we're going to be using Ubuntu Trusty 64-bit, which is, I believe, 14.04. Okay, there's actually boxes that we can download and we can initialize and we can create basically like a boilerplate. Okay, and the box is basically your operating system. Then you have the config.vm.provider, which is, in our case, VirtualBox. Okay, and like I said, there are other ones, Hyper-V, VMware Desktop. I don't know. There's a bunch of other ones, but I've only used it with VirtualBox. Next, we have config.vm.network, and this is basically how your host computer sees your box, okay, and sees your application. So this is where we configure your IP address and ports and all that stuff. Next we have the, let's see, vm.shared folder, and this is how you access files from your computer, because a Vagrant box is basically like a separate server. You can SSH into it. You could edit your files in, through the terminal, through something like Vim if you wanted to, but that's kind of a pain in the ass. You're going to want to be able to access your files from your local machine and use something like VS Code or Atom or Sublime Text or whatever it is that you use to edit your files. So you need to actually, that should say shared, not shard, but basically this will be able to sync your folders, and it actually shouldn't say shared, it should say sync. So it'll be synced folder. Sorry, guys. But you'll be able to sync a local folder with your Vagrant box folder. Okay, so that's that. And then the last one is going to be our provision, and this is basically what we want set up. So do we want, for instance, a lamp stack like we're going to do? Do we want a mean stack? Do we want to install Node.js? What do we want to actually run as a provision when our Vagrant box is set up? So these are the 5 main parts of the file. If you understand these 5 things, which I'm going to obviously go over in depth, then you understand the basics. All right, so I'm going to close this up. I just wanted to kind of use it as an example. I'm not going to save it or anything. And now we're going to get started. So let's go back to the browser, and we're going to go to, I forget the exact URL, so I'm just going to search for Vagrant boxes. I think it's the second, right here, discover Vagrant boxes. Now this is really cool because you can basically start from any type, any kind of environment you can find on this website and this application you can use. We're going to use this Ubuntu Trusty 64, which is just a blank Ubuntu server. Okay, but you can see there's a Laravel homestead if you wanted to work on Laravel. There's other versions of Ubuntu. There's other Linux distributions if you wanted to use CentOS instead of Ubuntu, Debian. There's things like this Scotch box, which is basically what we're building. It's just a simple lamp stack. But if you wanted to, let's say, build a mean stack application, we could search for mean, and there's a whole bunch of mean boxes here that you could just simply initialize, run Vagrant up, and you'll have that environment. So it's really, really cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this Ubuntu Trusty 64. So I'm going to open up my terminal, and let's clear this out. And all we have to do to start this off is say Vagrant init and then the name of the box, which in our case is Ubuntu/Trusty 64 because it's 64-bit. And all that's going to do is create a Vagrant file, and it tells us that. And if we go back to VS Code, you'll see we now have a Vagrant file. And by the way, I'm using a couple extensions. This little icon here, you probably won't see that unless you have the file, what is it? The file icons extension, or I'm sorry, VS Code icons. I also have the Vagrant extension for like highlighting and stuff like that. But let's open this Vagrant file. And it might look a little intimidating, but most of this is just comments. It's just telling you what each thing is. And those 5 parts that I just explained to you, you're going to see in here. So here's the box, which is Ubuntu Trusty 64. Like I said, it's basically just your operating system. It's the current box you're using. Down here, you'll see some of the network. There's a few of them, and there's basically different things you can do, so they have different examples. There's also the synced folder, and then there's the provider, which by default is VirtualBox, and then there's also the provision. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up a little bit. So we're going to get rid of this. And by the way, this 2 right here is just the configuration version, and it says please don't change unless you know what you're doing. So don't touch this line right here. Okay, just leave that. We'll get rid of the comments though. We'll get rid of these. Let's see, we want the VM networks, so I'm going to get rid of all these comments and just keep the config VM networks. So I want that. All right, and we want this synced folder, but we don't need any of these comments, so we'll get rid of that. The provider starts here and ends here at end, so we want all that. But we'll go ahead and get rid of this. And then we just want the provision, so we can delete all that, and that should be good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add a comment for each part here. So this is the box setting. This is the network settings, and let's see, this is going to be the folder settings. We have the provider, settings, and then we have the provision. Okay, so these are the 5 parts that I described to you. But what I'm going to do is I like to move the provider up, so I'm just going to cut this out and put it under the box settings. Now I believe that we don't even need this right here because VirtualBox is the default, but I'm still going to uncomment this because I want to show you guys a couple things. And I'm going to get rid of everything that's inside of here. Just make sure you keep the end. All right, so just having this, we'll be able to initialize the box. Actually, I'm sorry, we already initialized it, but we'll be able to create it by using the vagrant up command. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file, and then I'm going to go back to my terminal and clear this out. And I'm also going to open up VirtualBox just so you can see that it'll actually show down here. So let's go ahead and run vagrant up. Okay, make sure you're in the right directory. And what it does is it just reads that Vagrant file and it goes off of that. Okay, and we don't have any provisions or anything, so it's going to be just a blank Ubuntu server. And it's setting up SSH and all that stuff. Now, the first time you run Vagrant up, after you initialize a box, it's going to take a little longer because it has to download some stuff first. But after that, it won't take as long. And you can already see over here that it popped up in VirtualBox. All right, so that's now done, and you can see over in here in VirtualBox, if I click on this, it'll give us some information like the name, the operating system, the memory, and so on. But let's take a look at some other Vagrant commands now that we have our box running. So I'm going to go ahead and just clear this, and if we wanted to destroy this whole box, we could run vagrant destroy, but you only want to run that if you're done with it and you want it gone. If you want to just shut it down or suspend it, you can run vagrant suspend, And if you watch over here, you can see it changes to saving, saved, and now it's basically suspended. And if you want to resume it, you can run Vagrant resume. Okay, and that will restore it. Now, we can also restart or reload it with Vagrant reload, but what I want to do first is just show you that we can change some of the system specs here if we want. If we want to update the memory or we want to add CPUs or something like that, we can do that. So let's go over to our Vagrant file, and let's see. From here, what I'm going to do is go within the provider setting, and I'm going to say VB dot memory, and I'm going to set it to 2048, so 2 gigs, and we'll set VB.CPUs to, let's say, 4. All right, and I'll save that, and then what we want to do is reload. I'm also going to open up VirtualBox, and let's go ahead and run Vagrant reload, and watch right here. Once it reloads, it should change the specs. Yep, there we go. So now it's 2048 megabytes and 4 processors. So if you want to add a bit more performance to your Vagrant box, you can do that very, very easily. All right, so now that we've done that, let's SSH into our box. Okay, so let's clear this up, and let's say Vagrant SSH. Okay, so now notice that this now says Vagrant Ubuntu Trusty 64. That means we're actually inside of our box. And I'm going to clear this out. This is just an empty Ubuntu server. There's no Apache or anything. If I were to try to list the items in var/www, there's nothing there. Okay, now we can install whatever we want this way, but normally you're not going to do this. You're going to do this in your provisions instead of logging in and doing it manually, but I just want to show you what you can do, what's possible, and so on. So let's go ahead and let's install Git. So we'll say sudo, actually first thing we should do is an update. So we'll say sudo apt. So you can do apt get or just apt. So let's say update. So we'll just update our sources real quick. All right, and then we'll do sudo apt install -y. -y is just, you guys know, it's just going to make it so that we don't have to answer yes or no. And let's install Git. So even if your host machine, which is my Mac, doesn't have Git, now our box has it. So if I say git -- version, you'll see that Git is now installed. All right, so let's install Apache. So we'll do sudo apt install Apache 2. All right, so this will install just a basic Apache server. There's no PHP or anything like that. It's just the server itself. But now if I were to go and do an ls var www, well, actually now it's in the HTML folder, you'll see that there's an index.html file. All right, so we have an Apache server set up. Now, as it is, we can't really access it. Like, we can't go to a browser and access it because in our Vagrant file, the network settings are all commented out, so it doesn't know where to look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment this first one. And basically what this is saying, the guest is your box. The host is your local machine. So in my case, it's my MacBook. So 80 is actually the default port for Apache. And what we want to do is forward the port to our host's, local host 8080 port. Okay, so that's what this line is going to do. So if we save this, and let's go ahead and just reload. So we'll say, actually, let's exit out of SSH. So we'll just do exit, and then Vagrant reload. And you can see if we look at VirtualBox, it powers down and then restarts very quickly. All right, now if I go to my browser, let me just make sure that this is done. Should be done in a second. There we go. All right, so now let's go to a browser and let's go to HTTP localhost 8080, and there we go. We have our Apache start page. So this is basically that index HTML that I showed you. Now, if we wanted to change this, we could SSH back into our server. Actually, you know what? Let's first look at some other network stuff. So back in the Vagrantfile, if you didn't want to use localhost like that, if you wanted to use a private network IP, we could do that, and that's probably a better idea. So I'll comment that out, uncomment this line, and then this will be our IP address, okay? And it's a local IP address. This will not work outside of your network. So if we save that and then reload, and I'm just going to copy this IP address. And then once that's done, we should be able to access that page with this IP address. Okay, so let's go back to the browser. Let's pop in this IP address and go to it, and there we go. Now, you might want to take this a step further and add a host name for this. Instead of having to go to this IP address, you might want a nice local domain to develop on. So if you want to do that, you have to edit your host file. So let's go back to the terminal and let's clear this out. Make sure you're on your local machine, not on your Vagrant box. And if you're on a Mac or Linux, then you can just edit the etc/host file. So I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. So I'll say code/etc/hosts, and it's going to open it up. Now, if you're on Windows, your host file, it's going to be in your C drive Windows/system32/drivers/etc. And you're going to have to open Notepad or something like that as administrator and then open it from there. Okay, so once you do that, we'll just add in our IP address, which is this right here. So I'll grab that, put that in, and let's use vgdemo.local. We can add multiple aliases here. We'll do www.vgdemo.local. All right, and then just save this file, and it's going to ask me to retry as admin and to put in my password. All right, so that should be saved. Now we should be able to go back and go to http vgdemo.local. And there we go. So now we have a nice local domain name for our application, or what is soon to be our application, or I guess I could say our environment. All right, so now that we did that, let's go back into our terminal and let's do Vagrant SSH. And from here, what we could do is we could use something like Vim, or I'm just going to use Nano, and we could edit var www.html/index.html. And then this is actually the file that we're looking at in the browser. So what I could do is, I'm just going to delete the title. I'm horrible with these terminal-based editors. So I'm just going to change the title to Hello World. And let's go ahead and Command X and Y to save. And now if I go back and we reload, if you look at the tab, it says Hello World. Now you're not going to want to have to do that when you want to edit your files. So that's where the synced folder comes in. So if we go back to our Vagrant file here, we want to go down to the config.vm synced folder, and let's uncomment that. And this first one, this first parameter here, is going to be your guest, your host, which is your actual machine. What folder do you want to link or sync? And that's going to be the one we're currently in. So I'm going to just put a dot, meaning the current folder. And then for our box, the file, that we want to link, or the folder, is going to be /var www HTML, like that. Okay, so if we save that and we reload, let's exit out of SSH and let's Vagrant reload. Now what's going to happen is whatever we have in our local file here, which is just the Vagrant file, and then this .vagrant, don't worry about that. That's a hidden file with stuff that you don't need to worry about. But this is going to now be basically our server root. Okay, so we're not going to have an index.html file anymore if everything works out right. So once this is done, we'll check it out. All right, so let's go back and reload, and what we should see is just a listing of files, and we should see the Vagrant file. Okay, so now we can create an index.html, and we'll just put whatever. I'll use Emmet here. We'll say hello world, and we'll just add in an h1. And let's save this, and then we'll go back to Chrome and let's reload, and there we go. So now we have our index.html file on our Apache server, and it's accessible right in this directory, right in this project. All right, so that's synced folders. Now there's a couple other things I want to mention. If you want to make this a little more secure, you should probably add permissions here. So we could put in a second parameter, we'll put a comma, and then we can say mount_options, and we'll set that to a set of brackets, and we want to set the directory mode or dmode to 777, and let's set fmode to 666. So you can change it to whatever permissions you want, but I think that's good. Now you could do that. And then there's also something called NFS, or Network File System, that can increase performance of your Vagrant box. But I believe that it's only available for Mac and Linux. I don't believe it works on Windows. I think Windows just ignores it. But if you want to set that up, what you could do is right here, say :NFS, and then just wrap this in curly braces, like that. And that will set up the network file system. So I'm going to save this, and let's go back to the terminal and let's reload. Now when it reloads, we should see that it's using NFS. It should mention it here somewhere. So let's see if that works. And then once we're done with this, we can start to look into provisions. And I think it might ask for a password too. Yeah, so right here, exporting NFS shared folders. Okay, so it's basically like a faster way to access your synced folders. But we have to add a password, or enter our password. And this is your system password, by the way. All right, so that's all set up. Now we can start to talk about provisions. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to destroy this box. Okay, so you can see it's right here, it's running, but I'm going to run Vagrant destroy. It's going to ask to confirm, we'll say yes, and it's going to power off and it's going to go away. All right, now it's not going to delete like your Vagrant file or anything like that, it just deletes the box. So down here in provision settings, I'm going to uncomment this, and then whatever you put in here is going to run when you run Vagrant up to recreate this box. It looks at this file, it's going to apply everything, including these provisions, and by default you can see they're just going to update and then install Apache. Okay, so basically what we did manually. Like I said, usually you won't go in manually and install this stuff, you'll put it in your provision. So let's go ahead and save this, And then let's go back to our terminal and let's run Vagrant up. Okay, so now you'll see some extra stuff, because not only is it going to start the box up or create the box, it's also going to run the update and it's going to install Apache. And obviously, I mean, just having Apache installed isn't really something you would probably do. Well, maybe, I don't know if it's just a static website, but usually you'll want PHP or something like that. And that's what we're going to do. Excuse me, we're going to add more provisions. So right now it's running an update, and then it should install Apache. Yeah, you can see preparing Apache, all that stuff. You're going to see this warning, could not reliably determine the server's fully qualified domain name. Don't worry about that, that's fine. So now Apache should be installed. So if we were to Vagrant, actually we don't even have to do that. We can just go to our browser. Now when I reload, the Apache start page should be back. This should go away because this was part of our last box that we just destroyed. If I reload, now we're back to the default Apache page. And it may seem weird because we did actually create the index.html in here, but now if we look at this index.html, it's changed to the default Apache page because that was actually created with Apache when it was installed. So we can go ahead and get rid of this if we want. And let's just put back what we had. Oops. All right, if we save that and go back, there we go. So the next thing I want to do is, instead of just having, Apache and that's it, I want to set up a full LAMP stack. Now we're going to have to install PHP, we're going to have to install MySQL, some modules and so on. We want to run update and upgrade. So if we look in the Vagrant file, I don't want to put everything inside the Vagrant file. So what we can do is, instead of using inline, we can actually provide a separate file for our provisions. So I'm going to actually comment this out. And let's go down here and let's say config.vm.provision shell. And then instead of inline, we want to use path. And for our path, we just want a file name, and commonly you'll see bootstrap.sh, or you might see install.sh, something like that. So let's save that, and then we just need to create that file. So we'll go ahead and add bootstrap.sh. Now make sure that if you do this, when you package this up to transfer or give to somebody, make sure you include your actual provision, your bootstrap file as well, if you don't have it inline. So in here, what I'm going to do is, instead of typing everything out, I'm going to just copy and paste it in because it'll take me too long to type out. But it's all stuff that you would manually type in if you had a regular Ubuntu installation and you wanted to set up a LAMP stack. It's all just regular commands, just apt-get. We don't need sudo because it will be run as root. So basically, I'll start from the top here. We're going to update and upgrade our packages. We're going to install Git, so we'll have that. We're going to install Apache, just like we did. We're going to make sure that the mod rewrite extension is enabled for Apache so that you can rewrite URLs and stuff like that. Then we want to work on PHP. Now, when you install PHP, PHP 7 is not available with just the regular repositories. You have to actually add the ownreg, I don't really know how to pronounce that, the PPA repository. So we have to run this, and then we immediately have to update it, okay, if we want to install 7.2, which is what this is going to be. Once we do that, we can then run apt-get install PHP 7.2. Once we have that installed, we want the Apache mod, the PHP Apache mod, which is this here. Okay, and make sure if you're using PHP 7.2 or 7.1, just make sure that these match, all of these match. And then we're going to restart Apache. Once we do that, we're going to install a couple PHP modules, common, mcrypt, zip. After that, this says set MySQL user and pass, but it's actually just the pass. The user is going to be root by default. And we can use these debconf set selections and then pass this in. So MySQL server, which is the package name for MySQL, MySQL server / root password, and then what you want to use. In this case, we're using root for the password. And then this next line is just a confirmation. So root password again. So that'll set the password, and then we actually install MySQL server. All right, once we do that, we install the PHP MySQL library, and then we restart Apache. So these are the commands to install a basic LAMP stack. So let's go ahead and save this, and then what we'll do is go back to our terminal, and I'll also open up VirtualBox, and I'm going to just, you know what, let's just destroy this one. So we'll say Vagrant destroy. All right, so we'll completely destroy that. And then we want to run Vagrant up. So now we have this LAMP stack Vagrant box, and all we have to do is take the Vagrant file and the bootstrap file and run Vagrant up. And this is going to take a lot longer because it has to do everything that's in that provision file. And I'll kind of walk you through it. So it's just creating it, booting it up, setting SSH, same stuff it's been doing. And then it should do the NFS, set up the network file system. Okay, now it's going to do the update and upgrade. So if I get this, put this over here, it's going to do this here. Then it will install Git. You can see unpacking Git. Then it's going to enable, I'm sorry, it's going to install Apache. So you can see right here, Apache. And you're going to see some red. Some of it's just stupid warnings. Some of it is actually installing Apache modules or setting up the config file. Let's see. So now it's installing PHP. It added the repository first, then installed PHP 7.2. It's setting up the libapache 2 mod. This is all, you can see, creating config file for the different PHP modules, PDO, stuff like that. And then it should start on MySQL soon. Oh, it's running the update again, I think. Yep, now it's installing MySQL server. It should have set the password to root. Don't worry about this warning here. It's going to install the PHP MySQL library, then it's going to restart Apache, and now it's done. So it just went through this script basically. And now we should have a LAMP stack. So what we'll do is let's clear this out and let's log in. So we'll say Vagrant SSH. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a MySQL database. So let's clear and let's say MySQL. User is going to be root, and then we want a password. So we'll hit enter. It's going to ask for a password. Obviously MySQL is installed, as you can see. So the password is root, and now we're in. So what I'll do is let's create a database. I'll just call it test. I always forget the semicolon in the shell. And then let's use test. And let's create a table called posts. All right, so in this table is just going to basically have an ID it's going to have an ID, and I wanted just a text field. I don't care about like building an application. I just want to do something very basic. So let's say ID, it'll be an int, it'll be auto increment. And let's do a text field, which will be varchar. Text is the name of the actual field, not the type. And the type is varchar, 250 characters. And let's say it's not null. And let's say primary key is ID. Okay, so now if we say show tables, we see posts. All right, so let's do a simple, let's just insert a couple rows here. So we'll say insert into posts, just the text field, values, and we'll put a string of hello world. And we'll do another one. We'll just say test post. All right, so now we can say select all from posts, and there we go. So we have two entries in our post table. So now what I'll do is quit MySQL, and let's exit out of our shell, out of our Vagrant box, and let's go to our text editor. I'm going to close up all this stuff. This should be done. And let's go to our, let's change index.html to index.php. Okay, and since we recreated the box again, it put back the standard Apache file. So let's do this once again. And then just to test out PHP, let's throw in our tags here, and let's say PHP info, which should just give us all our environment, PHP environment info. So we'll save that. We'll go back to our browser and reload. And there we go. So it tells us our system is Linux, Vagrant, Ubuntu, Trusty 64. It gives us the version of PHP 7241. All the configurations. It should give us all like the maximum upload sizes, all that stuff. And if you wanted to change any of this, you could go to your PHP ini file from within your Vagrant box. Let's see. It should have all the modules like PDO, stuff like that, PDO drivers, MySQL. Anything you want to know about PHP on your system, on your Vagrant box. All right, so now what I want to do real quick is just create a very, very simple application in this file that will basically fetch the data that I just created. So I'm going to paste this in rather than type it out, because this isn't a PHP class or a course. This is for Vagrant. If you want to know more about this basic PHP stuff, I do have a YouTube series called PHP Front to Back if you want to check that out. But basically what we're doing here is creating our host, user, and pass for our database. 3306 is the MySQL port. Then we're setting a connection variable. We're using the MySQLi library, and we're using this connect function, passing in that stuff to connect. If there's a connection, or I'm sorry, if there's not a connection, we'll just run the die function. If there is a connection, it'll keep going. It'll echo connected successfully. Then we're going to select a database, which is test. That's the one we created. We're going to select all from posts, put it in a result with MySQL query, and then close the connection. And then down here, let me just grab this real quick. So down here, I'm just going to comment this out, and under hello world, let's paste this in. So basically, why does it should have formatted? So we're going to check to see if there's any rows in result. If that's greater than 0, then we're going to keep going. If not, it's just going to say no posts. If we keep going, we want to loop through our results. So we're going to use a while loop, and we're going to say while row equals MySQLi fetch object, which will get the result as an object. And then in each list item, we're going to just spit out the text. the text field that we created. So there should be 2 of them. So let's save this and let's see if it works. So we'll go back and reload. And there we go. We get connected successfully, and it's spitting out our two posts. All right, so you can see that our LAMP stack is up and running. And even though this is however long this tutorial is, all you need now is those 2 files, the Vagrant file and the bootstrap file, to create this environment so that you can work with PHP and MySQL. And obviously there's pre-made boxes you can use as well, so you don't even have to create your own, but I wanted to kind of go in depth and show you guys what this stuff is. All right, so that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully you'll look more into Vagrant. Like I said, I'll also be doing a course on Docker. That should be coming up soon. That's very similar technology, also very cool. But that's it, guys. So please subscribe if you're not and you like this type of content. Please like the video if you liked it. Follow me on social media. Support me on Patreon if possible. And that's it. Hey guys, if you've been watching my videos for a while and you really like what I do and I've helped you out a lot, consider becoming a patron. Even for $1 per month, it pushes me to keep bringing you guys the best content I possibly can. There's reward tiers for discounts, free Udemy courses, personal support, and more. So check out the Patreon link in the description below for more info.